What up, everyone? DJ Nubis here with you on the Military Podcast. Here with my co-host and great friend Kevin Lambert from E Entertainment Headquarters, with a special guest down below, Anthony Jordan from Anthony Jordan Movies and Gaming. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me for this edition of the Cinematic Synergy, where we sit down and we review Highlander. Yes. From, I'm trying to remember now if I can get their year right, 1986. Stars Christopher Lambert, Roxanne Hall, Clancy Brown, and the mighty Sean Connery. May he rest in peace.
Yes.
Let's see. We got Big Bad Wolf in the house already. And that one is me. I don't know, man. I don't think he can really fight. I don't think he'd beat us. We're the top dogs. You could try, though. You could try. Anywho, before we dive into our review of this, I do want to go ahead, for those that have not ever seen this, give them a little bit of a glimpse of what they're getting in with Highlander. And before we talk about our experience and everything, let's check out the trailer.
Because you were born different, men will fear you, try to drive you away.
I am Conor MacLeod. And I am immortal.
Here we are, born to be kings. We're the princes of the universe.
You will always be weaker than I.
Here we are, we're the princes of the universe. Here we belong, fighting for survival. We've got to be the rulers of your world. Take me to the future of your world.
There can be only one.
There you go. So as we usually go along when we do these shows, we kind of just go around and talk to our guests about when was the first time they viewed it, how they come across it, and we'll start with Mr. Lambert, my co-host. When was the very first time you got to check out Highlander?
I would imagine it would have been in the early 1990s. So I cannot remember the year, but I do remember, I think I just caught it on terrestrial television. It was just aired one day, and I remember the first thing that stood out was the soundtrack, like you've just shown in the trailer. Queen's soundtrack for this whole, film. The film itself is an amazing movie, like the story behind it, these dueling, immortals, fighting each other. But then what helps the story progress is the epic soundtrack, and I think the songs that were created for the movie by Queen are just as, well remembered and as well loved as the film itself.
Yeah. Anthony.
Well, my first exposure was actually the TV series. My mom introduced me to that, and I liked it, and it wasn't till several years later, that I actually got to see the original movie. And fun fact about the soundtrack, when they brought the band in, I don't know if they were shown a rough cut of, or remember if they were shown a rough cut of the movie or given the script, but they were told for each of them to pick a scene they like and have a song for that scene. So like every scene you see with a Queen song, one of the band members chose that song for that particular scene.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking too, because they were talking about that. Like, Queen was obviously the soundtrack to this, but like they even did Flash Gordon earlier in the 80s. And like, it's pretty crazy how much they were required or asked to do like soundtracks. Like, that's very cool when like studios say, you know what, let's get these guys. They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
My first time actually is a lot like what happens when I do this stuff with you guys. And so for like Anthony, he had never seen some time ago, had seen Brotherhood of the Wolf. So obviously we did that big whole talk and discussion on that, and he got a chance to see this. So it's always nice when I can find something that you guys hadn't seen and show it to you. Well, that's kind of like what happened with Highlander. I've been hanging with friends in my teens, and one day I just happened to go over to one of the friends' house, and we're all grouped there, and they said, yeah, you ever seen Highlander? It's such a great movie. It's like, no, and they're like, dude, they were like shocked that I had never seen it. Like, and they stopped what they were doing, got the DVD out, popped it in, and said, sit down, you're watching this. Same thing happened with the Warriors when I first saw it.
I was going to say, you mentioned that story with the Warriors, and it's
Yep, they just stopped what they were doing. They didn't want to do anything else at that time. Even though you had plans, they were like, nope, sit down, we're going to watch this. It's like, okay. And sure enough, I fell in love with the film. To explain the film, Highlander is a 1986 fantasy action adventure film directed by Russell Mulcahy from a screenplay by Gregory Wyden. Now, the film chronicles the climax of an age-old war between immortal warriors depicted through interwoven past and present-day storylines. It is the first film in the Highlander franchise. And it should be noted, because Anthony did discuss the series that was on television, that actually dealt with I guess a cousin of Connor, Duncan MacLeod.
Yeah.
But eventually Connor does make an appearance in that series, but it was different than the movies. And I remember being kind of like bummed at first about the series. I'm like, I wanted Connor MacLeod in this, but turns out the series was very good. Duncan MacLeod, Adrian Paul, I think, was the lead, and he did a very good job with that.
For reasons we'll discuss during this, like, when you look at the rest of the series as a whole, you kind of have to treat this first movie as soft canon, because going by the ending of the movie, he was the last one.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I did notice you have a sword there. Is that from the first one?
No, it's just a regular katana, but since
representing, yes,
since he uses a katana, I figured have it off frame a little.
Yeah, so I never actually got one for the first Highlander film, which would be cool. I knew someone back in the day that had one that was really nice, but I did manage to pull up the third film that Mario Van Peebles was using.
Oh,
very cool. I don't know if you can see some of the engraving with the wings and
that looks cool.
So.
I kind of like the parallel that his was more demonic, where MacLeod had a dragon head one, and in Japanese culture, like, dragons are more associated with heaven.
Yeah, and it was white, so it was like kind of like the good versus evil type of thing going on there with that.
Yeah. If you notice as well, this film has now gained like cult status, or as a massive successful movie now. But when it was first released, it had a budget of 19 million. But it only made 12.8 million at the box office, which is that would be considered a box office flop.
Yeah, definitely.
Even though it didn't, do as well at the box office, it's become legendary, and it's got legacy status now in the the movie community, because obviously it might not have done well in the initial release at the cinemas, but as it's progressed through time and more people have now checked this movie out, they've just fell in love with it.
Yeah, that's what's crazy to me, because like they ended up making at least 2 sequels. I don't think they ever made a 4th, unless that was the one they did with Paul, but I can't remember if that was a movie or just TV movie. I can't remember.
Endgame came out in the theaters.
Oh, it did. Okay, so it was actually a movie. Okay, so yeah. So despite the flop, it still ended up getting some sequels, which was pretty interesting. But I agree. I think that over time, it's just become its own like cult favorite, and sometimes gets lost. Like we have a lot of cult favorites these days that we all remember from our past and say, "Oh yeah, that's a movie we should do at some point." If this hadn't happened on this show, I would have done it on the Vintage Cult Cinema, which I'm getting ready to start this week, where I'm kind of focusing on stuff like that. So.
It's kind of interesting. Like, this movie came out like March 7th, 86. So the movie's just under 2 months older than I am.
Yeah, it's actually just couple weeks older than well, actually I wouldn't say older, but a couple weeks before my birthday, so which is
And
happening
don't-
tomorrow.
And another thing I've noticed is I've just been reading there, even the sequels didn't do as well in the box office, but they kept making sequels because clearly there's a demand for it. So, for
Right.
example, Highlander 2, The Quickening, that had a budget of 34 million, but it only made 15.6 million at the box office. And
Yep.
I do like the second one. Now, the third one's considered the worst of the bunch. But according to this, it had a budget of 26 million, so it had the highest budget of all of the movies of Christopher Lambert. But it made 36.7 million. So even though it's classed as the worst of the bunch, it made the most money at the box office.
How is it?
That's what's funny to me is that I thought that the second one was the worst because it totally went off plot. It just went into this whole other realm. Now the third one's not like a Oscar winning movie, but I did feel
Yeah.
like it kind of got back to what we were doing in the first one. But yeah, it's really weird because once it is weird how they approach this because once Connor won the prize, that should have been it. Like that, yeah. But then we had to like restart shit because I know the second one they wanted to find a reason to bring back Connery, and then of course that was all about aliens and all sorts of crazy shit. And then of course the third one, we get back into where he's back to just being immortal, but then having to fight to the last again. So it's really really weird universe or timeline that they've kind of got going on in here.
Like I said, you kind of have to treat the first movie as soft canon. So, like, even though the events didn't happen, you kind of have to rationalize that they weren't the last ones and that the final battle with the Kurgan was just another battle among many rivals he fought over the centuries.
Yeah.
Yep. So obviously the film, it starts out in 1985 New York. We have a present day Connor McLeod was born in like the 1700s with a clan in Scotland, and then he's sitting and watching a wrestling match, and this is a very interesting opening for a movie that's dealing with immortals, and so he's just kind of sitting there, solemn face, which I have to say, Christopher being given the lead role was masterful because even when he gets into the cop station after being arrested, he's looking at the cop that's like staring him down. He's almost hypnotizing him because he's just staring at him with like dead eyes. Like it's so crazy, the effect that he has as a stare. But at the arena, he gets like this sixth sense where he can sense when another immortal's around. And this is the point where now the immortal are gathering. This is called the gathering, where they get together at one location, have to fight to the end till the word one left. And they basically, in order to defeat the immortals, you have to cut their head off.
Yeah.
So they end up, and this is one thing I loved about Highlander is that you got swordsmen from different cultures using different swords and different backgrounds to fight each other. And so this one guy looks almost like he's from Spain or something, given by the way his sword is. And so they fight in the garage, and of course we see this interesting thing is once Connor's able to defeat Castle, or Faisal I think his name is, there's like this electric vibe that happens where it lifts up the body, and then the power source, so it comes from the fallen immortal, is then sucked into the winner of the fight. How do you feel about the opening sequences to this film, Anthony?
I thought it was brilliant. It, with the exception of the voiceover by Sean Connery in the beginning, it doesn't really tell you a lot about what's going on and just drops you in the middle of it and explains it to you as going along. The wrestling scene was fun. And even just seeing him, like, you can just tell he knows something's wrong and that'll be explained later. And then to go to this all-out sword fight in the parking garage with the decapitation, and it really like I can imagine people seeing this, not knowing anything about it, were just kind of like really like perplexed in a good way, like, okay, what's going on here? I gotta find out what's happening next. Just a very strong opening to a classic movie.
Kevin.
Me, I love the opening of this because it starts off like you have that, the scroll, the red scroll at the beginning with Sean Connery's voiceover. Then it pans right into, like, at the time, right in the middle of the 80s. And it's like, at Madison Square Garden, it felt very real, very grounded. And then it kind of takes this mystical fantasy turn in the car park with the sword fighting and these two, I guess, modern knights now battling it out for, survival. And it's just a crazy beginning, but there was something with it. The fact it's set like there and then in real time, I guess, in the 80s, to then go and kind of off track with the fantasy element, that it generally gripped you for right off the beginning. And it's because it grips you straight away with how it opens up. And the one thing that I always loved about the opening is the aerial shot in Madison Square Garden. Now, think about this was in the 80s before we had drones or anything like that. So you had a live crowd. That's probably real footage from a real match that's going on at Madison Square Garden, this wrestling match, because they had the Freebirds, which is Michael Hayes, who's, had the Tonga Kid, who's a well-known wrestler. So you had these wrestlers.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure they were real wrestlers. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So it was like real footage being taken at Madison Square Garden. And then you had that amazing aerial shot with the camera angle that flies over the whole Madison Square Garden through the crowd, but then it projectiles up towards where Christopher Lambert, McLeod is sitting, and then all you get is that amazing shot with all the people going wild and just that like the light around his eyes, and it just instantly gripped you. And then he gets up and goes to the car park and has that amazing fight sequence, and it just instantly gripped you. So straight away you're hooked.
Yeah. So after the fight in the garage, of course, Connor McLeod tries to drive out. He actually goes under the name Russell Nash here in modern day because he has to change his name every so often to make it look like that he's passed away. So he has to take on a new identity. So he's coming out of the garage and gets arrested by the police. And then we get this flashback to his days as Connor McLeod and his clan, Fraser clan or whatever it was, or that's the one they're fighting. But they're in the Scottish Highlands. And so the McLeods are getting ready to go to battle with the Fraser clan. And so one of the things I really enjoyed, I know you guys probably did too, is like the scenery, the shots in this are just fucking amazing. Like they're just so beautifully done. So they get ready to go into battle. And on the other side of the Fraser clan, we have the Kurgan, played by Clancy Brown, masterfully done. And he's got this sweet ass war armor on. It's like dark. And he's not even really part of the Fraser clan, but I'm assuming because he knows who Connor is. And he knows what Connor is going to be. And he's trying to like just take him out before he has to deal with him down the road. Yeah. So he's made a deal with the leader of the Fraser clan. That's like, look, all I want is that dude. You can kill anybody else you want, whatever. I just want that guy.
Well, he's the last of the Kurgan tribe who's a descendant from Russia. So clearly he's somebody who's been around a very long time. If he's the last descendant of this tribe from Russia. So obviously that's why he's known as the Kurgan, because he's the last of his breed, basically. And obviously, you've mentioned he makes a deal with the leader of this rival tribe. And then the only thing he wants is, of course, McLeod, who you must sense, like you said, they have the sixth sense of other immortals. So he obviously gets the sense that there's another mortal in the area who's McLeod. But obviously, McLeod's totally oblivious that he has this ability at that time.
He'd probably been stalking him for a good long while at this bit and For all we know, he might have orchestrated this clan war behind the scenes just to go after McLeod.
Yeah, my impression was because the Kurgan isn't dumb, and so I think what he was doing, and it doesn't get stated, but this is just the way this played out. I think the Kurgan purposely sought out inexperienced swordsmen and just it were like easy kills. So he would just go out and just hunt them down. And this is why we end up getting Ramirez later, who's like going to train McLeod to prepare for him. So it's like no one really knows if they can defeat the Kurgan because he's like one of the strongest ones out there. But my impression is that the Kurgan was just like, I'm just going to kind of cheat the system. I'm going to go find these guys before they even know what the fuck is happening. I'm just going to take them out. And that's pretty much what he was doing. Because at that point, Connor wasn't even immortal yet.
Yeah, and I think even Ramirez does state that the Kurgan is the strongest immortal of them all. Like, he states he's the most powerful of them all and the most feared.
Yeah. Yeah, he's very intimidating.
Oh, yeah. It's the voice as well. I couldn't imagine anybody else playing the Kurgan now other than Clancy.
Oh, I also love how, because we never get an actual name for him and he's just known by a description, it just goes that much further to dehumanize him.
Yeah, I think that's probably why they did it that way, but I also think because he is the last of his clan, of the Kurgan tribe, maybe he just wants to be known as the Kurgan. Is like, even though he comes across emotionless and, you know, his only motivation is to be the last one standing, maybe that's the only thing that he keeps tight of his chest, that he has like this thing about the tribe he came from, and that he wants to be known as the Kurgan and keep their memory alive as being this dominant, tough, very powerful tribe by him being the most powerful immortal.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is like, because obviously for the immortals, like whoever's the last one gets like the gift, and we'll get to that later, but the gift basically can be used for good or can be used for bad. So obviously the goal of Ramirez later was be like, we can't let this dude win the prize because that's gonna just destroy the world. This guy is not good, you know. So that's one reason why people fear the Kurgan, because he is the strongest. He's been around probably the longest, and it's like they got to find a way to defeat him.
Yeah, McLeod probably wasn't the only immortal Ramirez mentored, because he even like states that this one cannot be allowed to win the prize. So I could see him going around and just primarily mentoring other immortals to just try and stack the game against a Kurgan as much as possible.
Oh yeah, easily. In fact, I think that's why you find that when you go through the flashbacks a little bit, we find that Connor is actually friends with a lot of immortals. I think even to some degree Fassel, because he's like, you know, he's trying to tell Fassel hold off, but Fassel is always just trying to, like, he knows they got to battle at some point, so he's gonna fight him anyway. But the other guy later, they're friends. And so, like, I think a lot of like Ramirez and all them are all buddies, but the Kurgan doesn't do that. He doesn't like hang out with the other immortals. He's like, you're just gonna take your head. That's it.
When did the first Nightmare on Elm Street come out?
84.
84. So this came out in 1986, because just reading here, when the Kurgan travels to 1985, he goes under the name of Victor Kruger, which I find very interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, the battle between the clans happens, and eventually some of the opponents of the Fraser clan are not fighting Connor. Connor's like trying to walk around to find a fight. He's like, fight me. Come on, fight me. And nobody wants a piece. So he has like a kinsman that's like, well, come stand over here, man. They keep coming over here. Just stand over here. They won't fight me. Well, eventually the Kurgan gets off his horse. He's like, well, you'll fight me. And then it's very short-lived. Again, inexperience. This actually is Connor's first battle. So, you know, that's one of the reasons. But ends up stabbing or impaling Connor with his sword. And he's about ready to take his head, but then he gets ambushed by Angus and his kinsmen and thrown out. So it disrupts his moment there. So then we get this interesting moment where he passes and his girlfriend is upset, her wife, to the point that like it's just very depressing. You know, they were trying to protect him and actually didn't die in this battle, but they don't know what's coming. Then it happens where he comes back to life like Jesus. And everyone in this clan is like disturbed, like, and I can't, it's one of these moments where I'm like very angry at his clan for this, but like I understand at the time that they probably thought it was witchcraft. He comes back, but he acts normal. You know, he's loves his kinsmen, and they try to like, he comes into the little cafe or whatever the fuck you want to call it, the bar there, and you know they're just talking amongst themselves that they don't want a part of him. They think he's part of the devil, don't want to associate with him, and he's trying to convince them like, dude, would you rather me be dead? And they're like, well, you know, you're not supposed to be alive. That's how they kind of look at it. So eventually they just start beating his ass, and they got him in the shackles, and they're trying to run him around a little bit before they basically want to burn him. This is what his girlfriend, the one person that's supposed to love him to death, is trying to like get him executed. And it's a very heartbreaking scene to watch. And then Angus like says, you know what, we ain't gonna burn anybody, we're just gonna banish him. And he says, can you walk? He's like, come on, walk the fuck out of here. And sure enough, he does. It's just such a very sad scene, but you kind of understand what's happening because in this time period, they didn't know any better. Like, just no one believes in immortality or coming back from the dead. So, your thoughts on it, Kevin?
Very powerful. What I find funny is his girlfriend, who's just before the battle, you know, she's telling his cousin to protect him at all costs because she doesn't want to lose the man she loves. And then you have that scene where he's impaled and he's clearly dying. She's absolutely grief stricken, and the cousin's like, he doesn't need to hear a wailing woman as he's passing away. So, and then the next thing you know, she's the total opposite. She can't stand him and wants him to be burnt to death. But then that same cousin's kind of took her side and it's like, it's witchcraft, it's impossible, this is not meant to happen. But then I guess the elder of his friends, who's like the older gentleman, he, because of basically having his life saved by Connor McLeod, I guess, you know, he's probably minds all over. He's like torn what to do. But in the end, I guess it's like a respect thing that he ends up letting him go or saves his life. And the whole scene, like you say, it just shows you how people can change and twist on a dime, you know. Like, one minute they love you till the end of the earth, the next minute you're the worst thing to ever come across them, you know. It's you know, it also shows you how people react to the unknown. You know, how fear sets in and how fear can, you know, control a narrative of certain situations. And that's basically what happens, yeah.
And what do you think, Anthony?
It just it was a great, like, really, like, tragic scene. Like, your heart just breaks for him in this. Like, to go from out to war with everyone loving him to just coming back to not understanding what happened to him, and having, like, especially the woman he loved just being the one to most brutally turn against him.
Yeah. But when Angus is like, yeah, we're just gonna banish, she's like, no, burn him. I'll be like, bitch, shut the fuck up.
It is like a good testament to his character, though, that this didn't turn him bitter.
No, it didn't. That's an amazing action thing. But I give a lot of, you know, no one really speaks about it too much, but Angus is like really the big hero there because he's sparing his life. He could have easily just fallen in the same way. But I think he looked at it as like, this guy doesn't act like the devil. I don't know why he's here, but, you know, if he meant harm, he would have already done it. He's
Mhm.
like, just leave, just do us a favor and leave, because if you are possessed or whatever, we don't need you here. But he's just treating him as a human being, which is really good. All
Yeah.
right, so we have that. So now McLeod has been banished. So we go between, because I'm gonna kind of speed it up a little bit. We go between the future now, where we have the authorities as well as Roxanne Hart, who plays Brenda Wyatt. She's a forensic scientist who works with the police, but also has published books on metallurgy and swords, stuff like that. So she has a good history of knowledge of behind swords. So she's investigating the garage with the police, and she finds like little slivers of blades that were chopped into the concrete, which these swords are like built like bricks, man. They to be able to do that shit. Oh my god.
What's funny
Go
about
ahead.
that scene on the Anchor Bay DVD, there's a commentary, and I think like someone on the commentary who worked on, I forget who it was. I believe it was the director, but he actually does point out when she pulls that sliver of the sword out that it's really absurd how big that sliver of the sword is.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I don't think it even shows up on his blade anywhere. I mean, obviously you can't see it because it's all fast moving and whatnot, but that would have been like a huge chunk out of that sword if that was real.
Yeah.
So she's obviously very interested in the sword because it dates back many, many years and it shouldn't even exist in her opinion. So the police, of course, are still very much interested in Nash, but they don't have any concrete evidence that he killed that guy in the garage. So that's all going on underneath, and she's of course interested in Nash at some point. But during this, in a flashback, we get back to Scotland where Connor has moved on. He's got a new lady, a new wife who he met, Heather, very nice lady. And this is, of course, where Ramirez shows up, and he's now introduced himself. And this is played by Sean Connery. He's introduced himself as Ramirez. Tells Connor McLeod, we're brothers. You're immortal. I'm immortal. And I'm going to teach you how to defend yourself. And of course, Connor doesn't believe any of it. This is where some of the comedy comes into it, because Connor doesn't want anything to do with him or any kind of immortality, even though he knows deep down that there's something different about him. He just doesn't want to address it.
He keeps calling him a Spanish peacock.
Yes, he does. Hey, what's up, Red Spirit? How you doing, my friend? Glad you can be here.
There can only be one.
Can only be two, no one. So so we get this like montage. I'll play a little bit of the clips that I have here for this, but basically a little bit of training. You can see some of the scenery in this, and like I really like the part where they're on the boat and
Mhm.
Connor's just being a fucking prick to him, saying, you're an idiot, why are we doing this? So finally, Ramirez is just like, you know what? You need to be taught a lesson. So he tips him over, and he's like, I can't swim. And he says, yeah, but you can't drown, you moron. You're immortal. So as he's under the water, you get this. They did this nice underwater part with him very well, because I don't know exactly how they did it, but you can see him clearly, and he's like walking around the bottom of the lake, and he's like laughing, and it's bubbles and shit, and just you can't believe that he can breathe underwater. So there's a back and forth to where they're just training, and he's teaching them how to fight better. And so go ahead, Anthony. Describe what you feel about this.
I was going to say, like, once he like accepts he can't drown, he's having fun. But I love this whole like training sequence, just the way it's shot and how easily they sell his progression. Plus, you get all this absolutely gorgeous scenery we've been looking at. Like, they found some of the most like breathtaking locations possible to film these scenes, and it really sells the movie.
Definitely.
Yeah. Also, do want to add like the peculiar accent Christopher Lambert talks in this movie. He actually wanted a unique accent because the way he looked at it, basically, this character not only would have come from a time when a Scottish accent would have sounded nothing like a modern accent, but because he would have lived in so many different regions for so throughout the centuries that he would have developed such a strikingly unique accent over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like Frankenstein's monster, isn't he, the Kurgan?
Yeah. Yeah. The
With-
looks
with-
that Kurgan went through was pretty amazing. But yeah, so he ends up marrying this Heather girl, and of course Ramirez is training him, so they become friends, and he gets better at it. And Ramirez explains to him, like, yeah, we all will end up gathering at some point. At the point where we have to fight to be the last one, which could mean that he could face Ramirez if it ever got to that. Now there is one side thing where if you're on a holy ground, you don't fight. Like, that's a sacred spot that no immortal will break or should break.
Even the Kurgan won't break it.
Yep. It's the one rule. So again, we get thrown back to present day, and Brenda Wyatt is now trying to dig into Russell Nash's background in terms of like who he is, and she starts to discover that he's been around for quite a long time. He's just been changing names. And eventually they end up talking, and the police are still following Nash and trying to like see what's going on there. And then she's finally, Russell Nash exposes her as the author of the book because she's trying to pretend she's not who she says she is. But either way, we got that going on in the present day where she's still trying to figure out where the sword is and, who he is. And then, of course, when we go back, you saw some of the clips there where Ramirez is talking to Heather. Now, one thing that Ramirez has done is he's told McLeod, like, you should leave your lady because you're going to outlive her. And McLeod doesn't do that, of course, but not before Ramirez has to fight the Kurgan in the castle. Like, that's where you saw that. And I forget what they say Connor was. Was he just out training somewhere? Is that was the whole thing?
I don't think it was really addressed, but he was obviously out doing something.
Yeah, he just wasn't there. So turns out the Kurgan shows up. He was looking for McLeod, obviously, but ends up having to fight Ramirez. And Ramirez almost gets him. Like, he cuts his throat, but not quite, just taking off the head. So later on, we see where he's got the safety pins on his throat to keep his head intact.
I know it's not like really implied, but when you look at like the hatred Ramirez seems to have for the Kurgan, does it feel like there's a chance that the Kurgan could have murdered his wife?
Possibly. Yeah. I mean, the Kurgan didn't care about anything. No humans, nothing. So he was just very much, that's why it's like you're worried that if he ever wins the prize, like what the world would even look like.
Yes.
So, obviously they're fighting, and, I do love how Ramirez is just very smart. It's like, you improved your voice. So how do you feel about the things that are unraveling between the present day and what's going on in the castle, Mr. Lambert?
I think it's good because you're getting an overall like emphasis of what the story is. That it's like a jigsaw puzzle where they're putting the pieces together for the audience to follow. So, and it's also giving you reasons why to have even more. You want to root for McLeod, and you have greater sympathy for him because first he gets banished from his own clan. Then he meets a woman who he falls deeply in love with, and then Ramirez is saying you'll lose her, and when you do, it'll be a heartbreak. And then, he loses, Ramirez through defending her in many ways, and then obviously she gets raped by the Kurgan, but she keeps it a secret from McLeod, and then you see her getting older and gradually passing away of old age. And then it skips forward to the future where he's now got to face the one man, the one enemy that's been haunting him basically for his entire life up to this point. And it also builds why you love to hate the Kurgan as well. Like, the fact that he not only did he kill Ramirez and rape the woman, he literally fucking destroyed his castle. He destroyed his home. He
Yeah.
literally knocked the friggin' place down, and all that was left was a shambles of the ruins of a staircase and the foundations around them.
Which
So
kind of shows you the power that Kurgan had too. Like just like otherworldly, like lightning would strike and he could like smash into that concrete and it would just like shatter. Like it was crazy.
yeah. So for me, it's just the whole sequence of events. It's just great storytelling and great character building for both, I guess, the hero and the villain of the story.
Anthony.
Well, Ron, I love this storytelling dynamic where you're telling a story, but bits of it are told in the past in flashbacks. It's just a very fascinating but very hard way to tell a story. And especially like the sequence when it shows his wife getting older and dying. It's a case where like the music of Queen like really elevated this movie. Without Queen, we would not have Highlander. I'm gonna go on record into saying it, and especially that scene with the song "Who Wants to Live Forever," which that scene really hits how terrible it would be to be immortal, and like it's just this powerfully emotionally tragic scene that I love it to pieces for going the direction they did, how they did it.
That's the thing that I thought was crazy, because for an action film like it is, you have that scene where Heather is just old, like and she understands what Connor is. Obviously, it was explained by Ramirez and everything, but she understands like she's dying and he's still young, and so he's still there and she's wondering why he stayed. And I thought this was like a testament to who Connor was as an individual, because he was gonna stay loyal to her that entire time no matter what. And that's what he told her. He said, because I love you, I'm not abandoning you. And unfortunately, as a mortal, he can't bear children. So that was something that she kind of regretted, but he understood and just like, didn't hold any grudges. Like he knew he didn't tell her he couldn't do it. That wasn't something that he would share with her just for the pain. But, it's just, it was a nice moment, even though it's like a very touching one. So I like for a movie that's only 111 minutes, that's able to give you the action, the comedy, and the sadness or drama that you would want in a film, and they don't have to get really cute with it. It's just there. And Anthony said, the musical score drives it. It drives this entire film.
I think it's the musical score that's kept the film around.
Oh yeah,
because as soon as people hear that song, "Don't Want to Live Forever," as soon as they hear that, the first thing you think of Highlander. Or if anybody sees the beginning of Highlander and hears Freddie Mercury's voice during the beginning of the movie, they're like, the ears lift up and they're like, oh, is this associated with Queen? But then as they're watching it, they then gradually get into the story, which is such a unique, great story that they end up sticking with it. And then as they continue to stick with the film, they hear more of the Queen's score, and it just keeps on getting bigger and bigger and better as the film progresses.
I think they did. I think they still used it for the series too, if I recall.
Yeah, like that one song. It's like the theme for the
Prince of the Universe
franchise. It's kind of like cooking like a stew or something, where you add all these great ingredients, but it seems like something's missing. And when you add that one ingredient that just slightly stands out and just holds the recipe together, that's what Queen's music in this movie is.
Yeah.
So so Ramirez, he ends up losing to the Kurgan. And as Kevin pointed out, Kurgan ends up killing Ramirez, raping Heather, but she doesn't really tell him. And even though Connor hears about it later when they're talking with the Kurgan, but he takes Ramirez katana as his own and moves on in life, but he buries Heather and of course moves on at that point. So now we're coming back to modern day, and he starts developing a relationship with Brenda when he has to prove to her that he's immortal, because she starts figuring out through his signatures and like the birth certificates and everything that he's not who he says he is. So she wants answers, and so he takes her to his pad. He has like this museum that he runs, and a nice lady, which I just call her a watcher. I think that's pretty much what they called him in the series, was watchers, right?
Yeah, like you can retroactively write her in as she's his watcher.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's very cool thing, because she was actually a very cool character. They didn't spend a lot of time on her, but there was that moment when Connor has to say goodbye to her, and there's like a nice tearful moment. But either way, he takes Brenda into his little pad there, and he's got all these suits of armor and swords and claymores and stuff over his years as a human being, because he's lived a long time, so he's collected a lot of stuff that's worth a lot of money. So she's like immediately interested, like, wow, this is crazy. So he hands her a dagger. He says, take this, and she does, and then he goes to explain that he's Connor McLeod of the Clan McLeod and that he's immortal. So as she grabs it, he grabs her hand and impales himself with it, and then
Yeah.
proves to her that he cannot die. He's not bleeding, nothing. So she's crying because she thought she killed him, but realizes that he's still alive, proves that he's alive. So then they develop this relationship. Now through some of this, we're still having sword fighting in the streets. Kurgan is fighting. I can't remember the guy's name, but he looked like he might have been Jamaican or something.
Yeah, it's the guy that McLeod was having a conversation with on the bridge in the park.
Yeah,
Who was
so
friends
one of the
with.
people he knew. Yeah,
Also, remember, we also skipped over my favorite performance in the movie, and it's when he meets Brenda in her apartment, and he has that really old brandy, and he pours her some. And
yes,
he's talking about the year, and as he's smelling it, you can see all these memories flooding back to him. And this is before he revealed he's immortal, but he's talking about the events of that year from the perspective of someone who lived it. And it's just such a subtle and powerful performance.
Yeah.
that's why I thought Lambert was such a great pick for the character, because between his solemn face and like that moment where he makes you believe he actually is immortal. Like you can believe the scene,
And
like it's that strong.
he also plays it like just a little bit crazy at times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Kurgan is fighting this other guy, this other immortal in the streets of New York, and then we have this Wahoo Marine who's driving around in his Trans Am, and he's just looking for trouble. He's got Uzis in the front seat and shit. And he ends up coming across to fight, and so he's like,
Mate,
getting
I
out.
think this part's the most bizarre part and the out of place part of this full movie.
You're like,
Where
he
you've
has
got
a-
this.
He has this shirt on that has like the Kremlin on it with a target and a nuclear missile going forward, and it says something like "Hello, Moscow."
Yeah. Well, I think part of the reason is that due to the news sources and everything, because these beheadings were all happening for a while over the months. And so I think people were kind of worried, like, is there a serial killer out there cutting heads off? What's going on? So I think this guy was actually looking for the killer or killers.
Mhm.
So, but he's so kind of like out there already that he's like, all right, soldier, let's go, let's do this. And he's running through the alley.
He's got PTSD, hasn't he? He's got post-traumatic. And with you saying that about Moscow in the bomb and saying, oh, let's go, don't forget, Kurgan is a descendant of a tribe from Russia.
Yeah.
So that's weird that he's got that. So, so Kurgan is probably going to get some revenge without actually knowing.
So yeah, the Kurgan defeats this other guy, gets his power. But before he can actually get the energy, the soldier shoots him with the Uzi, knocking him back. And then when the soldier's looking for the body, he can't find it until he turns around. And of course, the Kurgan impales him with his sword, which only really kind of wounds the soldier. I mean, it's not probably a good feeling, but he sits down and he's bleeding. And this is when we see again the power source that comes from the dead body to go into the Kurgan. There's like witnesses down at the end of the alley going, "Ooh, look at that." So that leads, of course, to when the soldier's put in the hospital, the cops come to interview him. And at first they're kind of like, yeah, you take care of yourself, man. They thought it'd be Nash. So they throw the photo up. He's like, that's not him. This dude had like scars here and shit. He looked crazy. But as they get ready to leave, he's like, I got something else to tell you. And this is when, of course, he starts talking about the glowing lights and everything. The cops are like, okay, buddy, talk to you later.
Mind, I love the cop. He's played a cop in a few things. The grey-haired guy, forgot his name, but he's always been like in a comedy role as a comedy cop. And I love that scene where he's sitting at like the stand, the hot food stand, and then you've got the guy at the news agent stand reading like the article that's basically taking the piss out of the police. And he's like, yeah. And they're basically talking about him.
It was fun.
Yeah.
Why the guy's reading the article, he's like reaching around, grabbing the mustard and putting more mustard on the hot dog.
Yeah, he's just mocking him the entire time. What's baffling mean? Oh god, yeah. One thing I really do like one of my favorite scenes, of course, is when one of the promises that Connor made to Heather was on her birthday every year to light a candle at the church. So he goes there to do this, and of course, lo and behold, the Kurgan, who's now just down to him and Connor, decides to walk in the church and sit down behind him and talk some shit a little bit, chit chat as they call it, and there's some banter that goes back and forth between Connor and the Kurgan, but this is where Kurgan says, yeah, I raped his woman while his blood was still warm. And that's when he realizes that it was actually Connor's woman that he raped. And so kind of upsets Connor just a tad bit. But because it's holy ground, they don't get into any kind of scuffle there. But I loved the way that Clancy Brown portrayed the dialogue in this scene, because the nuns and the priests and he's just goofing off. He doesn't care about anything. He's like patting out the fucking candles. Like dude's like gives no shits.
And like people in the church are getting increasingly uncomfortable.
And he says to the priest, "What is he? I am slime," and then licks his hand.
Yeah, he's like, "I'm the scum of the earth. I'm so sorry."
Oh, mind, we skipped over the scene. We skipped over the scene as well. I love the scene where after he stabs the army guy, he steals the car and he looks at the one and goes, "Mom." And then the next thing is the car's going around the corner. She's on the windshield of the car.
Yeah, he threw the husband out and then she's like, "Mom."
Before he leaves the church, he quotes Def Leppard.
Yes. Yep. And that's funny too, because I think a lot of his character indirectly reflected the metal scene at the time in the 80s. Like, it was just that whole thing, how scary heavy metal was and all that. So yeah. I have no surprise that probably played a little bit of a part in some of that.
Yeah.
So then what we have, of course, we're getting close to the end where after Brenda's confronted Connor about his past and it's revealed they have a nice little love scene, yada yada yada. He tells her, look, you can't be near me because you become a liability in terms of your life. The Kurgan doesn't care about humans. He'll kill you in a heartbeat. So best you stay away until this is settled one way or the other. Of course, I actually caught the uncut version on Tubi, which showed the Kurgan following them. So that's something I hadn't seen before. Yeah, I don't think it's even in my original thing. So this is an original one.
Yeah, that's a bit I watched. The bit where they're at like a zoo or a park, and
Yeah. Yep.
basically talking about saying about you need to just keep away because bad news, bad things will happen. And as they're having this conversation, you see in the background, in the shadows of like the archway, you see
Yep.
Kagan walk from the shadows, and he's literally watching the whole conversation take place. And as she walks away, it's great how it's done, man. The lighting and the whole camera angle, how he comes out of the shadows because it's obviously very dark in like the archway. So he comes
Now,
out.
I will say this. I think that scene is problematic because one thing about the Immortals is they can sense each other pretty far away. So the fact that he wasn't able to sense the Kurgan until like the very last minute doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, like in hindsight, you can see why that scene was cut from the theatrical.
Right, because usually it goes right from like their lovemaking to where eventually the Kurgan shows up in the apartment building, and that's when he's like, "Hello, pretty."
So, if you're not familiar with Highlander, the quickening works kind of like Spider-Man's spider sense, where if there's another immortal around, you can sense the potential danger.
Yeah.
But I also think, though, depending on, yes, they've got that gift, but I also think, though, if you're overstressed, or if you're not, if you're mentally in a weird place, you might not pick up on things because you're mentally not there, and maybe because he's stressing about her safety, he's not, thinking properly, and because of the distraction, he didn't pick up that Kurgan was there.
Well, that's good theory, but maybe should have been explained by Ramirez. Like that would have helpful if they had done that earlier and said, you know what, maybe that's like outside of the fact that you can't have kids or that you have to outlive your loved ones. Maybe mention that it also might cause a distraction with you sensing another immortal. Like that would have been helpful if they would have thrown that in there.
It's also something they kind of in like future films in the series they completely ignored that, and it's like the quickening always works.
Mm-hmm. So obviously the Kurgan ends up finding Brenda and kidnaps her basically, and we get another car scene where he doesn't have to worry about this, so he's just like he's driving against traffic and he's running over people, which I always thought was kind of funny. You see these scenes with people's faces like as he's driving, she's terrified and he's just laughing at her and whatnot. So he goes to the Silver Cup Studios and is waiting. He makes a phone call to Russell Nash, Connor McLeod, and says, "I got your woman. Come fight me. It's time." And so that's when Connor embarks on his trip to go see the Kurgan and fight the final battle. So start with Anthony. How did you feel about this last portion of the film?
It was just a good rush to the final battle. We get the nice scenes with the two of them. We get him abducting her, which gives McLeod his final motivation that I have to fight this guy. This has to end tonight. And we get the final farewell between, what was the other woman's name again? The one that
Heather?
Heather. Like, we get their final farewell, and he's like, "I'm leaving everything to you." And even though he's older, you kind of get the sense that she almost looks at him as a son.
Oh, you mean the Watcher? Yeah, no, I don't remember her name. I'll find out though. Go ahead.
But like that was a nice finale, and then the rush to meet the Kurgan and begin a fun, like multi-phased
Rachel
battle.
is the name.
Yeah, so like Rachel, Rachel almost. It feels like Rachel almost does look at him as a son.
Yeah,
Well,
and that's what's cool about that relationship, because I think even in the series, they seemed like a little bit colder, but this one was like where she actually cared about him and like looked after him.
I felt as if, because don't forget, Rachel, he saves her in World War I or II. He saves her.
Oh, is she
as
the
a
kid,
child.
the girl?
She's the child growing up. Yes.
Oh, I never made that connection.
Neither did I. Good job.
So
I did
yeah,
not make
so
that connection, but that
no,
makes
so
sense. That totally makes sense.
my theories is that she's in love with him
Maybe.
because she's the little girl that gets saved. Because don't forget, when they're hiding from the Nazis and he finds that, he goes, "What's your name?" and she goes, "I'm Rachel."
Oh,
And
yeah,
then
good job.
he picks her up, and obviously she then gets shot in the back. He gets shot in the back.
I should have picked up on that. I don't because otherwise I would have thought it was just a random thing during his past, but that makes total sense.
Yeah, so basically that's what happened. So then that's the connection. So the older lady who works for him in, I guess, the antiques, building where he also lives, she obviously, that's the same Rachel, but now she's a lot older. She's now like I would say in her 50s maybe. And you can tell, you said it's like a mother figure, but I think she's generally, because she's known him since a child and grew over the years in this different decade, she's got a genuine love for him.
It's possible. I'm probably leaning more towards the mother part just because she was telling him that he needed to find another love, because she knew his past. So yeah, she probably could have been in love with him, but I think she would have probably made that more known or something. But
if she was, it was definitely more of a familial love.
I was gonna say, like, she could have loved him like a baby sister.
Yeah. And I think it would have been weird for him because he knew her since she was a little kid. So it's like it would have been like weird to, fall in love with a girl that you helped basically raise, at that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead, Anthony. You were talking about the final scene there.
So go into the actual final fight.
Yeah.
I love this fight because we have her strung up on this sign, and they start fighting on the sign, and it goes to the roof of the building, and the Kurgan's hitting at the sign, and it just becomes a absolute mess. The water tower, how the cops didn't show up, I'll never know, but the water tower falls over, the water's electrified. Eventually they fall through a skylight into the building, and it's throughout the whole fight, even though we see how good McLeod is, the Kurgan clearly has the advantage. Eventually he gets disarmed, and the girl saves his life and he gets his sword back. And when we go into this final phase, you could see now McLeod is sort of dictating the pace of the fight. And I love the idea that as the Kurgan finally has his back against the wall, it's the one time we see him legitimately have this look of pure joy on his face. He finally found a true challenge, and just he still comes from this warrior tribe, so I'm sure he still has that mentality that I'm either going to win this or I'm going to die fighting the best fight of my life. So either way, I win. And it's just such a great fight, even if at times it's got that old school sword fight choreography where it's not that good. Most of it is better than not, and we get the great scene where they both strike at each other, and we realize the Kurgan loses his head, but as the power's coming out of him, we still see him holding the sword, and he raises it in an offensive gesture before all the energy comes out of him and just envelops and absorbs into McLeod. It was a epic finals showdown.
I think why he lost as well is because he was overconfident.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think because he had caused so much trouble and had, been been nothing but a thorn in McLeod's life for probably the majority of his life, that he thought because he had caused all this pain and all this distraction, it would be an easy fight, an easy win. But then McLeod, I think it basically empowered him to want to, kill the Kurgan even more. And I think it's because of that. That's why he kind of like, yes, he played to his game, but wherever he saw an advantage, he took it. And I think that surprised the Kurgan. And I think that's why he ended up losing the fight to him.
One thing I thought was funny, and I just thought about it now, but so after the Kurgan was getting the best of him early on, Brenda comes up and smacks him with a pipe, and then that's when the Kurgan turns around. He's ready to like, chop her down, and of course, Connor like stops him with his sword. And he makes the quip like, he does that little laugh. He does, what took you so long? Do you realize that's like the same fucking thing you said as Raiden in Mortal Kombat? What took you guys so long?
Well, they clearly obviously put that in Mortal Kombat as a reference to Raiden.
Yes. Yeah.
And I can honestly see why they cast him as Raiden in Mortal Kombat, because obviously there is similarities with the immortal aspects of Highlander with the lightning, and when you finally beat the person you fight, and this kind of like that lightning strike, that all that energy rushes through your body with the lightning and the energy. So it didn't surprise me really. I thought it was kind of typecast for him to be Raiden.
He's such
obviously
an underrated actor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's up, Jake? How you doing, my friend? Glad to see you guys. Eric, of course, and of course, Black Samurai. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Yeah, so here's some interesting stuff. According to the director, when they first shot the scene of the Kurgan bursting through the door in the castle to cut the table and have Clancy Brown instead ran in and cut through the candelabra. I don't know what the fuck that is. Nearly decapitating Sean Connery. As a result, Connery stormed off the set, but later Connery returned and Brown apologized, saying he was very nervous. Then Connery joked that he should use his stunt doubles more. Here's the other cool thing. So originally, Kurt Russell was cast as Connor McLeod, but he pulled out due to Goldie Hawn telling him he should pull out, and he went and did Big Trouble in Little China instead, which was still a great fucking movie.
Oh yeah.
I'm
not being funny. I can't see Kurt Russell as
Well, that's the thing. After so much time, it's like, even when people say like, yeah, so and so was up to do this role, I was like, I just can't see it. Like, if I really like a character, I stick with that character.
I love Kurt Russell, but I don't see it.
No. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't either. Yeah, I know, Eric, you don't like the sequels, and I understand that, but I still love this fucking sword from Mario Van Peebles. Like, it's just too fucking cool, man. Gotta have it.
At the end of the day, I don't care if it's considered the worst one. Highlander 3 is okay in my book.
Yeah. I mean, it could have been better, but compared to 2, like 2, I just hated the whole premise was dumb. I love Michael Ironside.
I was going to say Michael Ironside makes the second one.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, Big Trouble. So yeah, I think both actors got the roles they should have had, because Lambert really killed Connor McLeod. He was really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
The final fight, obviously amazing. Loved it. Again, I think I agree with Kevin that at this point, the Kurgan was so overconfident because of how easy it was for him to defeat all his other opponents, that he just thought he could overrun McLeod, and McLeod just got the better of him.
Let's not forget, at this moment, McLeod had motivation to also protect someone, where all the Kurgan wanted to do was just kill and claim the prize.
Yeah, and I think that was something else too, because again, this shows the power of the Kurgan, because during the Ramirez fight or any other fight that the Kurgan was involved with, there wasn't someone to step in and kind of help out McLeod. I know it sounds kind of cheesy because Brenda just hits him with the pipe, but he would have probably killed Connor at that point. So it's like there was this interruption into it. And so that sort of gave McLeod a chance to regroup himself and get his shit and remember everything that Ramirez taught him. So I think that was a big factor in terms of him getting back into the fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love Big China a lot, or Big Trouble in Little China, but I think my favorite from Carpenter would probably be Escape from New York still. I still love that film. So,
Mine,
Escape from New York, yeah. I
mine
like that. But
I
or The
think
Thing. The Thing is still way up there on my list too.
I'd
So
go
just
with Prince of Darkness.
very underrated film. Very underrated film. Very dark, which I like too. So let's rate Highlander. Does it still resonate with you? Let's start with Anthony. You're our guest today. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolute classic that for me, it just gets better with age. It probably helps that I'm the same age as the movie pretty much, but it's a 10 out of 10. Love the movie, love the everything about it, the fight scenes, the cast, the performances, the music in the movie. It's just a superb movie from start to finish.
Kevin.
pretty much what Anthony said. I love the film. The music alongside. Like I said, I love the story. I love the two dueling characters between the Kurgan and McLeod. I love how it's a jigsaw piece that comes together with the images of the past and the present. And it tells just an overall great story with great characters, but most of all, music. The music score, I think, propels this film beyond, I think, anything else. And I think out of the entire Highlander series, this is by far the first one's the best. And if I was going to rate the Highlander, I still think I get to 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I agree. The film is still resonates today. It's still a cult classic by big standards. Definitely 10 out of 10 for me, without a doubt. Some more interesting tidbits here. You brought up how in the church scene that Kurgan looked a little bit like Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Well, apparently Brown almost turned down the role, but he was finishing portraying Frankenstein's monster in The Bride in 1985. So it's kind of funny. If he took some of that for this role, I don't know. But
yeah,
the other thing was apparently because they got Sean Connery to do all his scenes in 1 week. And apparently Connery had made a bet with the director that he couldn't do it in 1 week. So the director won. But they said that while they were in Scotland, Connery was drinking a lot, so he was drunk often. So they had to hurry and get his scenes done before he got too drunk. So I think that's kind of funny with that one there, as far as like the trivia on that. Every time an immortal dies, S is gathered into him. Yep. I haven't watched Highlander in years. I gotta get back on that, man. I agree, though. I just watched
Another
it
thing
recently.
I like is how it's
I have
less
not seen that film actually.
ambiguous as to what powers they're exactly gaining when they kill another immortal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know, like, because the Kurgan man, like I said, we believe he's probably one of the originators. So like, his power is very overwhelming, which probably made him the strongest. But judging by different immortals, especially when the gathering happens, like how powerful were they really? You just didn't really get to see too much of it.
I
outside of the
I kind of feel like more than anything when it's taking their power, when you claim the head of an immortal, you not only gain all the experience that immortal had with the sword, but you gain the experience of everyone that immortal killed.
that would be a good twist.
So like these are like older ones, they have like hundreds of different lifetimes of experience with the blade inside of them.
The only downside to that, though, is if you gain like their experiences, he would have experienced his wife being raped by the Kurgan.
Well, again,
So
I mean, just
that's
more,
like,
not like true memories, but just more specifically, their experience with the sword itself.
you mean their abilities? They gain their abilities,
Yeah.
and skills.
Oh, so okay. So here's a couple more things. So one, according to Brown, he got no salary to play the role in the Kurgan in this. He didn't get paid, and so the producers, because this was originally the part was offered originally to Arnold Schwarzenegger to play the Kurgan. Again, I can't see it, but that's interesting. But when Brown asked about the salary, the producers told him that you got to work with Sean Connery. That's payment enough.
And also, like, Brown was apparently very method in this film, because I remember the director talking about it in the commentary. And by the time it got to where they were doing the scenes with his final look in the film, it was like, you just did not approach the guy.
Yeah.
I think originally, when you look at the Kurgan, they probably needed somebody who was a certain height, a certain build, and had like a certain look to play the Kurgan. So I think, I'm not saying that not that he's talented, but if Arnold Schwarzenegger turned the role down and they needed somebody like quickly, they might have just looked at Clancy and go, he's got a look, he's got a deep voice, he potentially could pull the role off. But then at the end of the day, he took on that role and he made it his own.
So let's be real with Clancy Brown. He is absolutely intimidating in everything he does.
Absolutely. And he's not just an amazing actor, he's an amazing voice actor. He's done some amazing voice acting work.
Lex Luthor in Superman the Animated Series.
Yes.
He's great in the movie The Bad Boys with Sean Penn. He's like excellent in that earlier 80s film.
Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah.
Yeah, the funny thing is too, when they talk about the soundtrack, which they hit out of the park with Queen, but apparently David Bowie was considered, and then Sting was actually considered to play Connor McLeod. I don't see that one at all.
No.
But then they had Duran Duran that was considered for the soundtrack, and I think Queen is just better suited. Again, it's hard to say with hindsight, but the way that it works is just
especially because Queen's music is almost rock opera in nature.
Yeah.
Yep.
This
The
film
whole
is
story,
very operatic.
I was going to say that, operatic, also metal and swords and all of that stuff, knights with armor, and it goes side to side with rock music.
Yeah,
it's also like you don't see like many like modern day fantasy films.
Mm-hmm. True. And the ones that they do generally, the ones that do see generally always suck, to be honest.
Yeah, it's true. And that's the thing too. Like back then, even though they didn't have to use a lot of it, the 80s was like filled with a lot of practical effects, which just works better for me. CGI is fine, but it depends on what it's used for. If it's overly done, like say the Clash of the Titans remake it looks terrible. I just hate it so bad.
I know they're planning a remake of this, and like the one thing I don't want to see is a scene where the hero and the villain, the sword fight goes into full CG. Like
the only thing I think we've got for the remake is that Henry Cavill's tapped to be in it. I think he's been confirmed. But he obviously, if he's got any sort of push with the producers or the direction of the movie, because he is somebody, when he dedicates himself to a role, he really works to make it as authentic to the origin material, and that's what he's doing with Warhammer. He's really going to spend a lot of time to get it right. That's why he left The Witcher as well. It's only The Witcher. He left The Witcher because the writers and the creators of the show didn't stick to the source material, and even though he signed on to do more than one season, he dropped out because he goes, I don't want to work on something that's not what I want it to be, or I don't have the passion for it anymore, because you're basically turning a story that I love and you turn it into something else.
He had a clause in his contract for that stated that if they went in that direction, he's allowed to just drop out.
And I think the third season's gonna flop. I generally think because they cast Liam Hemsworth to replace him in the exact same role, and I think a lot of fans will just switch off because they probably don't want it to continue without Cavill. And so to have a new actor, and not that I'm saying Liam Hemsworth is a bad actor, but I can't see him making much of a difference to the show.
He's not a bad actor, but he's not a leading man either.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's find out what you guys have coming up on your channels. I know, Anthony, you just recently put something up. Why don't you tell people what you've been doing?
Well, I've just worked on. I'm just now working on the finishing touches for my Godzilla versus Hedorah review. So then I just have to process it, upload it, add my thumbnail tags and all that, and that video's good to go. And I just watched. Well, I have to finish watching Godzilla versus Gigan, then record and do all the rigmarole for the review for that one.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Lambert.
Well, as you know, I'll be doing my own live on Tuesday. It's an Into the Darkness special. It's gonna be Demons 1 and 2 with you two gentlemen and Mr. Tony of the Dead. Then on the 27th, which is the Thursday night, once again at 10 p.m. UK time. Is it 5 p.m. your time?
What's that? For which one?
For the for both of them, the demons.
Oh, Into the Darkness? Oh, no,
Mhm.
that's going to be 6 our time.
So 6 p.m. your time, both Tuesday for Into the Darkness Demon special and 6 p.m. Yeah, 6 p.m. I'm doing Kaiju Connections. We're doing the Space Amoeba. We've got a full roster. There's about 10 people joining for that one, including Rob from ATN. Also, on the Friday, though, I do start my new segment called Education, which is where I will pick a subject in the world of entertainment that I don't have much knowledge of, and I'll be bringing in a number of guests to give me a quick education on these subjects. And the first one is Gundam. Mobile Suit Gundam, which I don't really follow a lot of anime. I don't really know much about it. So Mr. Anthony Jordan in Gojira 851 will be joining me and teaching me all about Gundam. And then I think the following week on the 28th, it'll be us three again, I think, and potentially Mr. Tony the Dead when we do the Retro Classic Movie Show and we'll talk about Legend.
Yeah. For the Gundam one, I've been doing some additional research, so I've got some good facts about the life of the creator to add to that.
Well, the more you can teach us and tell us, the better. So
He's referring to Cavill as far as Highlander. All right. Well, for me, actually, probably about 30 minutes from now, I'm going to be doing a new unboxing. Got a lot of stuff to go through. I got a lot of stuff that came in, so I'll be doing that pretty soon here after we get done here.
Is that gonna be live?
It will be live. Yes, it will. Wednesday, I'll be doing 2 episodes of Ghouls of Midnight with Mr. Tony the Dead. The second one, which will be his later in the evening, will be for the new Popeye horror film. So that'll be interesting. And then,
I didn't even know it was out. I didn't even know that was out yet.
Yeah, I guess so. I think it's part of that whole fairy tale horror, I guess, like the Bambi and stuff like that, I guess.
They're all doing a lot of these twisted fairy tale movies, but I don't think the Popeyes are part of that because that's called the Twisted Childhood Universe, and that's got Blood and Honey, the Winnie the Pooh movies 1 and 2. Then it's Bambi the Reckoning, and then it's Peter Pan Nightmares, and then the next one, I believe, it's Pinocchio No Strings. So them
Yeah.
them 5 films are a part of that shared unit, and at the end of those 5 films, they're going to be doing something called the Pooniverse Assembles,
Facts.
which
Facts. Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't go female.
Well, there was actually talks with that with
Of course
I
there was.
can't think
course
of
there
her
was.
name, but the one who played Nebula in the MCU, there was talks with her as the lead.
Karen.
She's actually not a bad actress, but like we
Karen
don't have to keep doing that.
Yeah,
We don't have to
Karen
keep doing that.
Gillan, who plays
Yes.
Nebula, but she's actually Scottish as well, so I could see that.
Just make her a wife. Just keep her a wife.
Or they
Man
could
talk,
do
baby.
it.
Man talk.
Well, you know what they'll end up doing, though, don't you? They'll end up doing it where if it succeeds the first Highlander with Henry Cavill, they'll end up doing a second one and they'll introduce a female character, and they'll
Well,
do what they're doing with
Is
John
this a
Wick.
show
They're
that was
trying-
made, Samurai? Is this a show that was actually made?
I've heard of that because I was looking
Yeah.
up the DVD set for the series out of curiosity, and one of them actually included something called Highlander the Raven.
Yeah, that is
Huh.
an actual series with a female Highlander.
No kidding. I'd check that out.
You know, that, like, I wouldn't mind, like, don't touch, like, either Connor or Duncan. Keep them men, but if it's, like, successful, I wouldn't be opposed to a spin-off with a new female character.
Yeah. Okay, so for my pick on Wednesday for Ghouls of Midnight, I chose The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which I believe Mr. Anthony Jordan will be joining us for that as well on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, I will be debuting a new podcast series on my channel called The Vintage Cult Cinema, which I will be joined by Gorgier851 from first film we're going to tackle is Killing Zoe. So that's going to be the first one we're going to get into. We're doing this, probably try to do this weekly. And I'll have a different guest each time I do it. So it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of go back and I'm just focusing on stuff that I feel is like either cult or not talked about enough. So obviously we just did Highlander, but since we did, I'm not going to worry about putting that on the list for that one. But either way, yeah, I agree here too. They could do a Highlander cinematic universe, obviously. Yeah. And that'd actually be a lot of fun. You could, I mean, I don't know who you get to do the Kurgan, but you can do like a younger prequel for the Kurgan and just find somebody to play that role, which would be very interesting.
Yeah, well, that's what I was trying to see. If the first Highlander successful with Henry Cavill, even though they didn't cast, Karen Gillan as MacLeod, if they did a sequel, they could always introduce a female, immortal with her in the role and then spin it off into their own movie and start off a cinematic universe, because basically that's what they're doing. If you think about it with John Wick, we've had 4 John Wicks and now we're getting Ballerina, but also, I do know Donnie Yen's supposed to be making his own spin-off from John Wick or with the Kane character. So it's only a matter, they state anything that makes money and is successful, they'll either sequel the hell out of it or because of the MCU, they will try to make some sort of expanding universe with it all.
But one of the biggest things would be, like, if you're gonna do more Highlander movies, you need to keep Queen's music in it. Pay whatever the rights cost. It's an important part of the formula.
Yeah, and if they do keep the Queen music in, make sure it's Queen singing. Don't get another band to do like a remake of the songs. Keep it as Queen, because you've often seen where like certain theme songs of certain movies, they've like done like a bootleg version out of cheap cost for a film, and it just sounds terrible.
Because we were talking about this early, Samurai. I think Endgame was, as Anthony put it, was put in the theater. So I remember seeing it on the Sci-Fi Channel at the time that the series was going, but I didn't know it was in the theaters. But I think there's only 4, unless I'm just missing something here. Like I don't remember
Highlander 2, Highlander 3. Then there was Highlander Endgame, and if you want to count the Source for whatever reason, then there's the Source.
Well, Highlander 3 The Sorcerer, Highlander Endgame, which came out in 2000, Highlander The Source came out in 2007. Then when it comes to television, there was the Highlander, The Search for Vengeance 2007 animated movie. Then they did the Highlander series, which is from 1992 to 1998. Then they did the animated series, which was on the back end of the animated movie, which was from 1994 to 1996. And then they did Highlander the Raven, which only lasted one season.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think it was more than 5 at best, but 4 major ones that I know of. But anyway, guys, appreciate the time hanging out with me, talking this film. It's been a lot of fun. Great movie. Obviously, we all agree. Still stands the test of time. For those curious, the next Cinemax Synergy that we will do, Mr. Lambert has selected, not forget the year, it's probably 98 Mimics.
Mimic.
Oh, I love that movie.
Yeah, well, we had brought it up actually because we were talking about the cockroaches during the live stream last night for Godzilla vs. Gigan and the cockroach aliens, and we brought up how the cockroaches basically had, mimicked or disguised themselves in the forms of these two human characters in the movie, and it reminded me of the Mimic. So, and I haven't seen that particular movie in quite some time. So I thought, well, it's a perfect opportunity to give me, to revisit it.
Yeah,
I haven't seen it in years. I saw that in the theater, but I haven't seen it in years. So, all right, guys. Well, appreciate again your time, and for you guys in the chat, thank you very much for hanging out with us today. Subscribe to these channel here, as well as Mr. Lambert and of course Anthony Jordan. They have great content there. And if you guys are around later, I'm going to be doing my unboxing soon. So see you later. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and keep it metal as fuck.